It started like any other road trip. Coffee in the cup holders, snacks within reach, kids half awake in the backseat watching cartoons and bickering about who was touching whose side of the seat. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth remembering. Just a normal family drive toward the border, toward a reunion I wasn't particularly excited about. I thought the only thing I'd have to survive that day was potato salad and a few fake smiles. Then, my husband whispered it. Turn the car around. Now, at first, I laughed. Or maybe it was more of a smirk, the kind of reflex you have when someone says something unexpected, and your brain assumes it must be a joke. But his voice didn't have room for jokes. He didn't look at me, didn't soften it with a smile. He just stared ahead, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the door handle like we'd hit black ice. Why? I asked. My voice sounded too casual, like I was trying to keep the car light, like maybe the kids wouldn't notice. He didn't answer right away. That silence was worse than if he'd shouted. Finally, he said, "Please, just turn around." That word, please, was what did it. My husband doesn't panic. His baseline settings are calm, and occasionally tired. I'd seen him deal with a kitchen fire once with less tension than he was holding right now. And suddenly, I felt it too. That crawling sense in the back of your neck when your body knows something before your brain does. I took the next exit. The last one before the border. It curved off gently, like the road itself was giving me one last chance to make a choice I didn't understand. The second our tires left the highway, I felt him exhale. Not completely, not safe yet, but like he'd just unhooked a seatbelt he hadn't realized he was wearing. "Okay," I said, gripping the wheel tighter than I meant to. "Want to tell me what's going on now?" He shook his head. "Just drive. Drive where? Anywhere but there." The kids noticed. Of course they did. My middle one leaned forward between the seats. "Are we going the wrong way?" "We forgot something," I said automatically. "What?" "I'll tell you later," the youngest piped up. "Is it snacks?" I didn't answer. My husband stayed quiet too, staring straight out the window like every mile we put between us and the border was one less weight on his chest. The silence stretched. 20 minutes, maybe more. Just trees flying past the glass and the sound of cartoons still chirping from the backseat. My heartbeat was doing something strange, heavy and uneven, like it knew the punchline of a joke I hadn't heard yet. Finally, he said, "Take the next turn off." It wasn't a road so much as a suggestion. Narrow, unmarked, a forgotten strip of asphalt meant for maintenance trucks or people who'd gotten very, very lost. My tires crunched over gravel as I pulled off, the forest pressing closer on both sides. Then he unbuckled his seatbelt. "Stay here," he said. And before I could argue, he got out, walked to the back, opened the trunk. I couldn't see from the driver's seat. My hands were slick with sweat against the steering wheel, and I hated the way my pulse was pounding in my ears. The kids barely looked up. They thought maybe we'd stopped for a bathroom break. But I knew better. Something was wrong. A minute passed. Then another. The sound of the trunk closing made my stomach drop. He walked back to my window, leaned down, and said, quietly but firmly, "Can you come out?" "Why?" My voice cracked, and I hated it. "I need you to see it." He didn't sound scared. He didn't sound angry. Just tired. Tired in a way that felt heavier than anything I could prepare myself for. I opened the door. Stepped out. The gravel crunched under my shoes like it was trying to warn me not to move. He led me to the back of the car, lifted the trunk again, and pointed. And when I looked inside, everything I thought I knew about my parents and about the reunion we were headed toward started to crack wide open. I didn't breathe right for the next 20 minutes. Not really. After what I saw in that trunk, my body kept doing shallow little sips of air, like it was rationing oxygen until my brain caught up. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but the words got stuck. My husband shut the trunk, walked back to the passenger seat, and buckled in like he was simply ready for the next stretch of road. Only it wasn't just the next stretch. It felt like we'd left one version of our life on that highway and were driving into another. The kids started shifting in the back. They'd noticed the silence by now. Normally, our car rides were filled with the chaos of snack wrappers, movie quotes, and someone inevitably crying because a sibling's elbow had drifted an inch too far. But now, just quiet. The kind of quiet that buzzes against your eardrums. My middle child broke it first. "Mom? Where are we going?" I forced a smile into my voice, kept my eyes straight ahead. "We forgot something, sweetheart. We'll head back in a bit." It was automatic, the way I said it. Years of practice and deflection, of soothing without explaining. My youngest jumped in, hopeful. "Is it snacks?" No one laughed. Not even me. Beside me, my husband sat with his hands clasped, fingers locked together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He wasn't panicking, but he wasn't relaxed either. He was holding something in, holding me together, in a way, by not letting himself come undone. I kept waiting for him to say it, to spell it out, to put words to the weight in my chest. But all he said was, "Just drive." So I drove. Mile after mile of trees blurred by, the kind of endless green that makes you lose track of distance. The kids slumped back into their cartoons, their little neck pillows bobbing with each bump in the road. For them, the crisis had already been forgotten, replaced by the glowing screen in their laps. I envied them for that. My hands ached from how tight I was gripping the wheel. I loosened them for half a second, flexed my fingers, then wrapped them back around the leather like the car might fly apart if I let go. "What were you looking for?" I asked finally, my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. He shook his head. "Not looking." I already knew. That answer was worse than silence. "How?" He didn't respond right away. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on a thought too bitter to swallow. Finally, he said, "When they gave us that bag." Something in their eyes. Like they'd already decided for us. And just like that, the image of my parents' faces when we left that morning came back to me. Their smiles. Too wide. Their wave. Too casual. The way my dad patted the trunk like it was a joke between us. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now it felt like the moment before a trap springs shut. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. "With the kids in the car," I whispered. He nodded. We didn't speak again for a long time after that. Just the hum of tires on asphalt, the cartoon's muffled soundtrack, and the hammering thought in my head. They did this to us. My parents did this to us. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the things I wasn't ready to say. Full of the things he already understood. Full of the kind of truth you don't admit out loud, because once you do, it can't be undone. I stared at the road. He stared at the horizon. And somewhere in between, a decision was hardening, one that would carry us further from the family I grew up with and closer to the family we were fighting to protect. The road narrowed until it barely felt like a road anymore. More like an afterthought, a strip of cracked asphalt meant for no one. The trees pressed in on both sides, tall and silent, like they were guarding a secret. I slowed the car to a crawl. My husband pointed toward a gravel patch just wide enough for us to pull over. "Here," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. I parked. My hands wouldn't leave the steering wheel, even when the car was still. It was like my body knew that letting go meant admitting something was wrong. He unbuckled his seatbelt, looked at me for half a second, and then said, "Stay with the kids." Before I could argue, he was out of the car. I watched through the mirror as he walked to the back. The trunk opened. The sound was ordinary metal hinges, nothing dramatic. But in that moment, it was deafening. He stood there for a long time, just looking. Then he bent down, rummaged through the luggage. My pulse quickened. I hated not being able to see. The kids barely noticed, still absorbed in their screen. It was almost funny, the contrast. Their world was cartoons and juice boxes. Mine was spiraling into something I couldn't name yet. The trunk shut. A moment later, he was back at my window. He bent down, resting his hand on the edge of the glass. His face was pale but composed. "Come out," he said. My stomach twisted. "Why?" "Because you need to see it." He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound panicked. Just resolved. Like whatever he'd found wasn't open to interpretation. Like it was a fact we were both going to have to carry. I got out, my knees unsteady on the gravel. He walked me around to the back. Opened the trunk again. Didn't say a word. Just unzipped the red duffel my dad had handed me that morning with a smile like he was loaning us an umbrella. The zipper's rasp cut through the air. He folded back a sweatshirt, moved aside a towel. And then I saw them. Packets. Sealed tight in plastic. Dozens of them wedged between layers of clothes, stuffed into a toiletry bag that was clearly never meant for shampoo. For a second, I didn't process. My brain scrambled, searching for another explanation. Medicine? Vitamins? Something innocent? But I knew. The truth landed like a brick to the chest. Not vitamins. Not medicine. Not anything with a purpose except to get us arrested, handcuffed, our kids taken away, our lives split open. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. Fear hadn't hit me yet, not the sharp kind anyway. What I felt was heavier. Like I was falling straight through the floor of my own life. No bottom in sight. He zipped the bag shut again, slow and deliberate. He didn't add commentary, didn't accuse my parents out loud. He didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. They put that in our car, I finally whispered. My voice barely carried. He nodded once. With the kids, I said, louder this time, like saying it twice would make it real. Another nod. The ground felt unsteady under me. The gravel shifted, crunching in my ears like static. I looked up at the sky for some reason, maybe to steady myself, maybe to find something normal. But the sky was still blue, still calm. It hadn't gotten the message that my life had just split in half. How did you know? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed locked on the closed trunk, as if it might burst open again. Finally, he said, the way they smiled. Like it was already done. Like they were sure it would work. And that was it. That was the difference between us. He saw it. I didn't. I had trained myself not to see it, not to question, not to poke holes in the script my parents had written for our family. For years, I told myself they were just messy, just impulsive, just unlucky. He hadn't grown up in it. He didn't have the same blinders. He could see the trap for what it was. I swallowed hard. My hands shook at my sides. Every cell in my body wanted to rewind, to unpack that bag before we left, to catch them in the act, to stop it before it ever touched my children's car seats. But we were already here, already too close to the border, already one wrong decision away from losing everything. I stepped back, looked at my husband. He looked back at me with the same quiet certainty he'd had when he first whispered, "Turn the car around." And in that moment, I realized he hadn't just saved me. He'd saved all of us. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs were everywhere. They weren't sudden. They weren't hidden. They were woven into the fabric of my childhood, so normal that I didn't even recognize them as warnings until I was standing on the side of that access road, staring at a bag full of plastic-wrapped lies. My parents built their lives on image. Not stability, not honesty, image. If we looked successful, then we were successful. That was the rule. If the fridge had 5 different kinds of mustard, if the Christmas lights were perfectly straight, if my mom's nails were freshly manicured and my dad drove a car shiny enough to blind the neighbors, then we were doing okay. What the neighbors didn't see were the shut-off notices, or the winter when the gas ran out, and we all camped in the living room under the story of family fun, when really it was because the heat had been cut. They didn't see the nights of cereal for dinner, the endless cycle of working late that I later understood as code for, "We can't afford groceries this week." The script was always the same: keep up appearances, and if the truth doesn't match, lie until it does. And my sister, she inherited that script like it was a family heirloom. She was the shining one, the favorite. She could light up a room, charm her way out of anything, and pull people into her orbit like gravity. My parents adored her for it. She was their mirror, their proof that their way of life worked. Me? I was the boring one. Too serious. Too cautious. The one who followed rules like they mattered. My mom once told me, in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner no less, that I mistook discipline for personality. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when your own mother cuts you down in front of a turkey. But the truth is, I believed her. I really did. So I became the responsible one, the one who didn't make waves, the one who paid bills on time, double-checked locks, and drove carefully, the one they could call when they needed help filing insurance claims or navigating school paperwork, the one they could lean on when my sister lost yet another job and someone needed to bridge the gap, and I gave. Not too much, never enough to sink us, but just enough to keep them afloat. Because if I said no, I was selfish. If I said yes, I was useful. That was my currency in the family, usefulness. What I didn't understand back then was that usefulness isn't love. It's leverage. But as a kid, you don't question it. You don't have a language for manipulation, for emotional blackmail. You just know that being steady, being responsible, keeps the house from collapsing, even if it's at your own expense. So when they asked for just a little help for my nephew's private school 4 months before that reunion, I recognized the pattern. The setup, the pitch, the guilt. I said no. Finally, I said no. And their silence afterward, the way my mom's voice iced over when she said, "Of course, I forgot. You have rules," should have told me everything. But I still didn't see it. Not fully. Not until that red duffel bag. Because that's the thing about illusions. When you grow up inside them, you don't recognize the weight of the glass walls until they shatter. The ask always started the same way. Softly, almost casually, like they were embarrassed to even bring it up. My parents knew how to dress their requests in language that sounded reasonable. Just a little help. Only until next month. We'd do it ourselves if we could. It was never framed as a burden. Not at first. It was framed as an opportunity for me to prove I was a good daughter. That's how the cycle worked. First came the story, usually about someone else's needs. My sister's rent, my nephew's therapy, a medical bill, the roof, the car. Something that made me sound cruel if I even hesitated. Then came the promise. They'd pay me back. Things would turn around. This was temporary. And finally, the kicker, the guilt. If I said no, I wasn't just refusing money. I was refusing family. I had learned to weather it, mostly. To say yes just enough to keep the peace, and no just enough to keep my own family afloat. It was a balancing act I never asked for, but one I was assigned by birthright. Until the school. 4 months before the reunion, my parents sat me down with hushed voices and worried faces. My nephew, they said, was struggling. Bullying, anxiety, slipping grades. They had taken him to a therapist who suggested a smaller, more structured environment. They had found a private school. Exclusive. Expensive. Life-changing. They had the acceptance letter in hand, they told me. All they needed was the deposit. Just this once. Just a little help. The words hit me like deja vu. I'd heard them before. 12 different times. Different costumes, same play. And here's the part I hate admitting. I wanted to say yes. Not because I trusted them, but because I loved my nephew. I wanted him to have better. I wanted him to have the safety and support I knew my sister and parents could never provide consistently. But I also knew how this pattern ended. There would be no repayment. No resolution. Just more asks. More guilt. More weight on my shoulders while they shrugged it off. So I said no. I said it gently, like I was handling glass. I can't pay for private school. I have 3 kids of my own. We don't do private school. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was worse than yelling. My mom's lips pressed into a flat line. My dad looked at his hands. My sister wouldn't even meet my eyes. And then, finally, my mom said, "Of course. I forgot. You have rules." And that was it. Conversation over. Relationship frozen. We didn't talk for weeks. Until the reunion came up. Suddenly, everything was warm again. Cheerful texts, light chatter. "We can't wait to see you." Like the ice had never existed. Like the request had never been made. And I told myself maybe it was fine. Maybe they had found another way. Maybe it wasn't my business anymore. I wanted so badly to believe that. So when my dad handed me that red duffel the morning we left, just one extra bag that wouldn't fit in their car, I didn't question it. I tossed it into the trunk between juice boxes and backpacks and thought nothing of it. Because that's how the cycle worked too. When they smiled, when they seemed fine, I let myself forget. Only this time, forgetting almost destroyed us. The morning of the reunion started deceptively ordinary. Coffee brewing, kids running in circles, backpacks being zipped and unzipped a dozen times because someone always forgot a toy. The kind of domestic chaos that feels exhausting in the moment but safe in hindsight. My parents stood in the driveway when we pulled up to load the last of our things. They looked relaxed. Too relaxed. My mom in her neatly pressed blouse. My dad leaning against the car with his hands in his pockets like he had all the time in the world. It struck me as odd. Usually, travel days with them meant stress, snapping, someone inevitably misplacing their wallet. But this time, they were smiling. I mistook that smile for happiness. "Do you have room for one more bag?" my dad asked, holding up a red duffel. "Of course," I said without hesitation. We had the SUV, plenty of space. It was nothing. He set it down in my trunk, patted it once like a man satisfied with a job well done, and closed the hatch. I didn't even unzip it. Didn't ask what was inside. Why would I? It was just luggage. Family luggage. If I had paused, just for 1 second, I might have noticed the flicker in his eyes. The way my mom avoided looking directly at me. The ease, the lightness in their posture that didn't fit the people I knew. The people who always seemed weighed down by bills and obligations and whispered grudges. But I didn't pause. Instead, I told myself they seemed genuinely happy. Genuinely at peace. And I wanted that to be true so badly that I didn't question it. For once, they weren't asking for money, or help, or an explanation. They were just smiling, waving us off like normal grandparents. As we backed out of the driveway, my mom blew a kiss toward the kids. My dad raised his hand in a little salute. The kids waved back, giggling. It felt almost cinematic, the kind of goodbye you see in commercials, polished and wholesome. But now, replaying it in my head, it looks different. Too smooth. Too easy. Because I should have remembered. In my family, nothing ever came free. Their sudden joy wasn't relief. It wasn't pride in seeing us head out on a family trip. It was certainty. Certainty that the bag in our trunk would do the job they wanted it to do. Certainty that this time, the hustle was airtight. I should have seen it. I should have asked why people who claimed they couldn't afford groceries a month ago were suddenly glowing with the calm of people who had already solved their problems. But I didn't. I drove away with a red duffel in the trunk and my children strapped in the backseat, convinced that what waited for us was potato salad, awkward hugs, and small talk about the weather. What waited instead was the moment my husband would whisper, "Turn the car around," and the moment everything I believed about my parents would collapse in on itself. Once the trunk clicked shut again, it was like we'd both agreed not to speak until we were miles away. My husband walked back to the passenger seat and buckled in. I slid into the driver's side, hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. For a moment, we just sat there in the stillness, letting the heat soak through the windshield. Then I turned the key, and the silence followed us back onto the road. The kids had gone quiet too, lulled by cartoons and half-bored arguments over nothing. They had no idea what sat just a few feet behind them in the trunk. No idea what we'd narrowly avoided at that border. I watched their reflections in the rearview mirror, their little heads bent over tablets, and I felt sick. Every parent knows the instinct to protect, to scan playgrounds for strangers, to hold hands crossing streets, to buckle seatbelts tight. But this was betrayal from inside the circle. The people I trusted to love my children had used them as camouflage. My phone buzzed on the console. Once. Twice. Over and over. My mom. My dad. Then again. And again. I didn't answer. Neither did my husband. We didn't need to hear their voices to know the script. Where are you? What happened? Are you okay? And underneath it all, the real question, where's the bag? The highway stretched on. No destination, just directionless escape. I didn't realize until later that I'd been crying silently, tears slipping down without the sobs to announce them. My husband didn't mention it. He just stared ahead, jaw tight, like if he blinked too long he'd lose his grip on the moment. 20 minutes passed. Maybe more. Time didn't move right in those miles. Then he said, "We need to take it back." His voice was low, steady, final. I didn't argue. Some part of me wanted to scream, to throw the bag into the woods, to set it on fire. But we both knew what that would mean. Evidence destroyed. Questions raised. Threads pulling us deeper into a mess that wasn't ours. So we drove. Not back to the border. Not toward the reunion. But to the only place the bag belonged, their house. The decision sat heavy between us, wordless. I knew he was right. I knew it was the only way to protect ourselves. But every mile closer to their driveway, The guilt pressed harder. Not guilt for refusing them, not anymore. Guilt for how long I had played along with their stories. For all the years I'd chosen to believe the illusion, to cover their messes, to convince myself they just needed one more chance. The calls kept coming. A dozen, maybe more. Each one lit the screen like a tiny alarm. We ignored them all. When we finally pulled onto their street, the house looked the same as it always had. Front porch lights still on from the night before. Curtains drawn halfway, as if to stage a lived-in kind of comfort. Nothing about it screamed betrayal. Nothing about it looked like the place that had nearly turned me into a criminal by accident of trust. My husband got out first. Walked around to the trunk. I followed, though neither of us said a word. He lifted the duffel, heavy and loud against the still afternoon. Together, we carried it inside. The air smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old coffee. We didn't unzip it. Didn't adjust it. Just set it down in the hallway like a silent accusation. A bomb that didn't need to go off to ruin everything. Then he turned the knob, locked the door behind us, and we walked away. Not a word exchanged. Because there was nothing left to say. They didn't wait long. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. No warning, no text, no call first, just the sharp, insistent chime echoing through the house like they owned it. I knew before I even opened the door who it was. Some pressures traveled through walls, like a storm building in the sky. I cracked the door just wide enough to step outside, then shut it firmly behind me. I didn't want the kids seeing their faces. I didn't want those faces anywhere near my living room. My parents stood there on the porch like this was a casual visit, like they'd dropped by to deliver muffins. My mom gave me a tight little smile, the kind that looks practiced in a mirror, all curved with no warmth. My dad stood with his hands in his pockets, shifting his weight, trying to relax but failing. We wanted to check in. My mom said, her voice light and fake, like this was a brunch invite I'd somehow missed. My dad added, we thought maybe we could clear the air. I crossed my arms and said nothing. Let the silence do the work. They exchanged a glance, and then my mom tried again. We didn't know how much you understood. There it was. The tell. The slip. They weren't confused about what happened. They weren't panicked because we disappeared. They were worried about how much I'd seen. I tilted my head. You mean the bag? Neither of them answered. Which was answer enough. You put it in our trunk, I said slowly, deliberately. With your grandchildren in the back seat. My mom swallowed hard, her smile faltering. We didn't think it would be a big deal. My dad jumped in, his voice straining for evenness. It wasn't going to be anything. Just something to help with the debt. That's all. We were desperate. My mom added quickly. You wouldn't help. And there it was, the fallback excuse. Their one-size-fits-all defense. You wouldn't help. As if my refusal to bankroll their choices had forced them into risking my children's lives. As if betrayal was just a natural consequence of my boundaries. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. My voice came out flat, almost quiet. You didn't just betray me. You risked us. All of us. Your daughter. Your son-in-law. Your grandchildren. Neither of them spoke. My dad stared at the porch boards. My mom blinked hard, as though she wanted to conjure tears but couldn't quite summon them. We're done, I said. Don't call. Don't come here. You don't get to see the kids. This is over. Her mouth opened. I could already hear it forming, the classic script. You're being dramatic. Or maybe, you'll cool off. Instead, she just smiled again, soft and sing-song, and said, you'll come around. You always do. That was the thing about my mom. She could deliver poison like it was a compliment. She could twist certainty into doubt with just a phrase. And for most of my life, it had worked. But not this time. I turned, walked back inside, and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as the bolts slid into place, but my chest felt steady for the first time in years. And for once, I didn't wonder if she was right. 3 days later, the bottom dropped out again. It was a normal weekday, or it should have been. Work emails in the morning, a grocery list scribbled on the counter, the steady rhythm of a routine I was trying desperately to rebuild. By the afternoon, I drove to the school like I always did, expecting the familiar chaos of backpacks and chatter. But when I got there, my kids weren't waiting. At first, I thought I was early. Maybe I'd misread the clock. But then I saw the crowd thinning, parents collecting their children, teachers waving them off. My stomach knotted. I walked up to the front office, my voice too light, too forced. "Hi, I'm here to pick up my kids." The receptionist smiled politely. "Oh, they've already been picked up." The words slammed into me like a car crash. My heart stuttered, then started racing so fast I couldn't swallow. "By who?" I managed my throat dry. "Your parents," she said matter-of-factly. "They said you'd ask them too." I don't remember leaving the office. I don't remember crossing the parking lot. All I remember is being in the car, my hand shaking so badly on the wheel I could barely steer. The engine roared as I pulled onto the road, adrenaline drowning out everything else. There was only one place they could be. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, it looked like a birthday party had exploded inside. Through the windows I could see balloons, toys scattered across the floor, candy wrappers glinting under the lights. My kids' laughter carried through the glass, high and carefree, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Inside, it was surreal. My mom was slicing a cake, my dad kneeling on the floor assembling a Lego set that easily cost more than my week's groceries. My children were glowing, faces sticky with sugar, arms full of brand new toys. For a split second, I almost didn't recognize the scene. This wasn't how my parents operated. They weren't the doting grandparents who spoiled their grandkids. They were the ones who pinched pennies in front of us, who acted like generosity was a loan with interest. But now they were Santa Claus with a debit card. It didn't take long to see it for what it was. Not love, not joy, strategy, emotional bribery. They weren't giving my kids a magical afternoon. They were trying to buy their way back into our lives. My oldest looked up from a pile of Legos. "Mom, can we stay a little longer?" "No," I said firmly, my voice sharper than I meant. "We're leaving. Now." They whined, confused. "But why?" Grandma said, "We're leaving." The shift in my kids' faces gutted me. They didn't understand. Of course they didn't. To them, this was the best day of their lives. Candy, toys, attention. The grandparents who always felt distant were suddenly showering them with everything they'd ever wanted. Why would they want to leave that? "Can we at least keep the toys?" one of them asked, clutching a stuffed bear like it held the answer. For half a second, I hesitated. My instinct was to say no, to strip every trace of manipulation from their hands. But then I saw it the way my parents were watching, waiting for me to play the villain. "Yes," I said finally. "Keep the toys," because I wasn't giving my parents that win. I gathered the kids, ushered them out the door, ignoring my mother's sing-song call after me. "They'll come back to us. They always do." She said it like a promise, like a prophecy, like she still believed she could win. But as I buckled my children back into their seats, something hardened inside me. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't guilt or desperation. This was a choice, deliberate, manipulative, dangerous. And I knew, as I pulled out of their driveway, that if we stayed within their reach, they would never stop. That night, I didn't wait for some final straw or magical sign. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked at my husband, and said the words that had been forming since the moment we opened that red duffel. "We have to leave." The words came out of me like they'd been waiting for years. "We have to leave." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said it, plain and steady, like a fact that had finally caught up to me. My husband didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He nodded slowly, his face as tired as I'd ever seen it, but sure. He'd been halfway to that conclusion for a long time. I think he was just waiting for me to get there too. "I don't want them near the kids," I said. "Not at school. Not at the grocery store. Not lurking down the street, pretending to be harmless." He nodded again. "The transfer's still on the table," he said after a beat. His company had an office in North Carolina. Months ago, he'd floated the idea. His parents lived there, solid, grounded people who actually wanted to help. At the time, I wasn't ready to uproot everything. But now it felt less like a choice and more like the only option left. "You mentioned North Carolina before," I said. I wasn't ready then. I am now. The room was still, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm when you know you can't rebuild on the same ground. We didn't talk about revenge. We didn't fantasize about dramatic confrontations or payback. What I wanted wasn't justice. It was distance. We started quietly, like people planning an escape instead of a move. He reached out to his company. I started researching schools, rentals, the kind of details you focus on when you're trying not to drown. We didn't tell anyone. We didn't hint at it. We just moved forward like a tide pulling us out to sea. The days leading up to it felt strange. I went through the motions, school drop-offs, groceries, bedtime stories, all while knowing that soon we'd vanish from this place without a word. It was equal parts terrifying and liberating. I watched my kids more closely. Their laughter in the back seat, their messy rooms, their little arguments over nothing. I wanted to memorize it all, not because we were losing it, but because I was finally protecting it. Protecting them. The night before we left, I walked through the house one last time. Not the house itself, that didn't matter, but the version of myself that had lived there. The one who thought being responsible meant keeping the peace no matter the cost. The one who mistook usefulness for love. I let her go. By dawn, the SUV was packed. Clothes, toys, paperwork, snacks, the normal stuff, but with an undercurrent of finality. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. We didn't owe anyone that. We just got in the car, buckled the kids in, and drove. No duffel bags this time. No false smiles waving us down the driveway. Just the sound of tires rolling us toward a place my parents could never reach. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in the car felt like freedom. The move didn't feel real at first. It felt like we were just on another trip, another stretch of highway with juice boxes in the cooler and cartoons humming in the backseat. But then the signs changed, the scenery shifted, and suddenly we were in North Carolina, and it wasn't temporary. It was the beginning of something new. The air hit me first. Crisp, clean, threaded with pine. It smelled like possibility, like a place untouched by the weight we had left behind. Mountains stretched in the distance, steady and unbothered, like they had nothing to prove. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. They slid into new schools, made friends, came home with stories about teachers and playgrounds that didn't feel shadowed by history. Their laughter sounded different, not louder, not brighter, but unguarded. It was the kind of laughter that comes when children don't have to sense their parents' tension in the room. His parents, my husband's parents, lived 20 minutes away. They weren't dramatic. They weren't manipulative. They just helped. Showed up with casseroles. Offered to babysit. Asked questions with no hidden agenda. At first, I kept waiting for the twist, the catch, the sting behind the sweetness. But there wasn't one. They were steady, grounded, real. And slowly, my body learned to stop flinching at kindness. For the first few months, I couldn't look at my phone without a spike of dread. Every unknown number felt like a trapdoor. Every voicemail notification like a landmine. But we blocked what needed to be blocked, ignored what needed to be ignored, and gradually, the buzzing stopped. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable right away. It felt strange, like walking into a house you're not sure you belong in. But over time, it shifted. The silence became stillness. The stillness became peace. Our routines built themselves piece by piece. Morning coffee on a porch that smelled of pine. Evenings with homework spread across the table instead of arguments on the phone. Weekends spent hiking trails instead of bracing for guilt-laced family visits. It wasn't perfect. No life is. But it was ours, unshaken by manipulation, untouched by sabotage. I realized something one afternoon, months into this new chapter, as I watched my kids chase each other across the yard. For the first time in my life, I wasn't translating guilt into silence. I wasn't rearranging my boundaries to keep someone else's chaos hidden. I wasn't wondering what price would come with the next smile. I was just living. The past didn't vanish. It still sat in the back of my mind, a reminder of how quickly trust can be weaponized. But it no longer defined every choice. It no longer dictated who I was. We hadn't disappeared. We hadn't gone missing. We had escaped. And escape, it turned out, could look a lot like freedom. For a while, the quiet held. We built our lives in North Carolina, and the distance worked like a firewall. Calls went unanswered, numbers blocked, doors closed. I let myself believe that maybe the story was over, that my parents had finally learned how far I was willing to go to protect my family. But the past has a way of circling back. It was about 6 months later when I saw their names again, not on my phone this time, but in an email from my sister. The subject line read, "Emergency. Please read." I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to open it at all. Part of me wanted to delete it unread, mark it as spam, erase the possibility of being pulled back into their orbit. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I clicked. The message was long, frantic, and riddled with typos. The gist was simple. Our parents had been arrested. This time, they hadn't used me as their unwitting accomplice. They hadn't stuffed their schemes into my trunk or tried to hide behind my children. They'd done it themselves, caught at the border with a car full of packets, the same kind we'd found in that red duffel. They'd been charged with possession with intent to distribute and attempting to cross an international border with controlled substances. Not headlines. Not kingpins, just two people in their 60s who still believed rules were for other people. My sister's email ended with a plea. They needed money for a lawyer. They needed me to show up. They needed me to put the past aside because family matters. I read that line 3 times, each word sharper than the last. Then I hit reply. All I wrote was, I did show up once. I'm not doing it again. And I meant it. For the first time, I didn't waver. I didn't second guess whether I was being too harsh, too cold, too unforgiving. I wasn't. I was being clear. And clarity, I had learned, was the one thing my parents could never twist. Eventually, word trickled down through cousins and relatives. They'd taken a plea deal. 4 years each. Not forever, not life-ending, but long enough. Long enough to sit with the choices they made, if they were capable of reflection at all. When I heard, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was distance, the clean, solid kind. They were no longer a looming threat. No longer voices buzzing through my phone. No longer shadows at the edges of my children's lives. Just people who had written their own ending and finally had to live with it. My life now isn't perfect. No one's is. But it's ours. My kids laugh more. My husband sleeps better. And I don't live under the weight of waiting for the next favor, the next ask, the next trap disguised as family loyalty. I don't regret the boundary. Not for a second. But here's what I'll leave you with. Did I go too far? Or not far enough? Because walking away from the people who raised you, even when they've proven themselves dangerous, always comes with a question mark. Always leaves someone ready to tell you blood is thicker than betrayal. So I'll ask you, if you were me, what would you have done?